Welcome to truly scary shifting reality and parallel universe stories. Smash like and subscribe to tread the thin line between reality and the surreal. Let's begin our eerie expedition. I never believed in parallel universes until the night I returned home to find my family waiting for me, and realized they were not my family at all. The sky wore the fading hues of twilight as I shut the car door behind me. The suburban streets were quiet, with only the soft hum of crickets breaking the stillness. Home was supposed to be a sanctuary, a place where the day's burdens could melt away in the warmth of family. As I approached the front door, a sense of unease crept up from the pit of my stomach. My hand hovered over the doorknob for a moment before I forced myself to turn it. "Hi, honey!" Sarah's voice floated through the entrance, warm and cheerful as always. Yet, as I walked in, her arms wrapping around me in a hug, I caught a glimpse of her eyes and felt a shiver of discomfort. There was a coldness, a distant glint that seemed out of place. "Hey," I replied, pushing the thought aside. "How was your day?" "Great. Just usual busy stuff," she said, her tone exactly right, but something felt wrong. Sam and Beth ran up to me, their laughter echoing in the hallway. God, I lived for these moments, but even their laughter held a strange resonance. "Dad," Sam said, clinging to my leg, "guess what I built today?" "What did you build, buddy?" My attempt to sound enthusiastic felt forced, overshadowed by the creeping strangeness around me. "A spaceship. Come see." Sam tugged at my hand, his excitement seemingly authentic, yet his eyes, those eyes, something was missing. As Sarah went back into the kitchen, I followed Sam to the living room. His Lego creation was impressive as always, but I noticed Beth sitting at the table, drawing with an intensity that seemed unnatural for an 8-year-old. "What you drawing, Beth?" I asked, leaning over her. "Just a picture," she replied without looking up. It was a landscape, perfectly structured, with every line precisely in place. No smudges, no errors, nothing like the usual chaotic, joyous scribbles she used to make. My heart pounded uncomfortably. Maybe I was projecting my stress onto them. Maybe I was losing my mind. But the thought persisted, that something was deeply, inexplicably wrong. Later that night, as we sat down for dinner, the feeling grew. The food was perfect, but it lacked something, Sarah's touch. It tasted like hers, but the warmth, the touch of love, was missing. "How's work been?" she asked, her tone casual, but her eyes boring into me with that gleam. "Fine, just the usual," I replied, my voice tight. I forced myself to smile, but I couldn't shake off the sense that I was being watched, even scrutinized. That night, I couldn't sleep. Turning from side to side, the shadows in our bedroom seemed to shift and whisper. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, questioning everything I'd experienced since walking through the door. Unable to bear it any longer, I got up and wandered into the living room. That's when I saw the photo album on the shelf, slightly askew. I pulled it down and began flipping through the pages. The pictures were all wrong. They showed memories, yes, but each one was off, too perfect, too posed. The raw, candid joy that used to radiate from our family photos had been replaced by something sterile and manufactured. A chill raced down my spine as I closed the album and placed it back on the shelf. The family I'd come home to wasn't mine. They were something else entirely, and I had no idea what they wanted. As the unsettling revelations piled up, I knew I couldn't ignore them any longer. The next day, I sat on the edge of our bed, clutching my head in my hands. Sarah was downstairs, her voice drifting up with an eerie sing-song quality as she went about her morning routine. I needed answers. Descending the stairs, I confronted Sarah in the kitchen. "Sarah, we need to talk," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Sure, honey, what's on your mind?" She turned to face me, her eyes colder than ever. I hesitated. "Everything feels different. Are you okay?" "Of course I am," she replied, her smile not reaching her eyes. "We're all fine, Daniel. Maybe you're the one who isn't okay." Her words echoed ominously as I backed out of the kitchen. My heart raced. Was I going mad, or was she gaslighting me? The thought gnawed at my sanity, further deepening the chasm of doubt and fear. I knew I had to dig deeper, to understand what was happening. That night, long after Sarah and the children had gone to bed, sleep eluded me once more. I found myself in the living room, flipping through old records in search of something, anything, that could validate my fears. My fingers brushed against an old newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Local man vanishes without a trace." Chills ran down my spine as I read about disappearances similar to what I suspected had happened in my own home. The more I dug, the more frightened I became, but the more determined I was to uncover the truth. The perfect family I had returned home to was nothing but a facade, and the sinister reality lurking beneath it threatened to devour me whole. This was no longer just about discovering the truth. It was about survival and finding a way back before it was too late. Dinner felt like a stage play, each of our movements rehearsed and exact. Sarah served the dishes with mechanically perfect grace, and the children ate without their usual chatter. Every clink of cutlery felt scripted. Unable to bear the mounting tension, I finally broke the silence. "All of your stories, your behaviors, they're just too perfect. What's going on?" Sarah paused, her fork hovering midair, and her eyes fixed on me with that chilling coldness. "What do you mean, Daniel? Everything is exactly as it should be." "Is it?" I pushed my chair back, standing up to face her. "Because it feels like I'm living with strangers." Sarah's smile was thin, almost predatory. "Maybe you're overthinking it. Stress can do strange things to a person's mind." It was a non-answer, a deflection, and it only fueled my paranoia. I turned and stormed out of the dining room, needing space to breathe and think. Up in our bedroom, I tried to calm my frantic thoughts. Was I truly losing my grip on reality, or was there something more sinister at play? I couldn't shake the feeling that the family downstairs was watching, waiting for me to crack. In the middle of the night, I found myself at my office desk, desperately sifting through pages of online forums and news articles. One particular forum thread caught my eye, filled with accounts of people who suspected their loved ones had been replaced. My husband's eyes used to sparkle with mischief. Now they're cold, calculating. My children's laughter sounds hollow, like an echo from a distant place. The descriptions resonated deeply. My hands trembled as I read through the comments, finding validation in their shared experiences. A user named Truthseeker had left clues, hinting at a hidden gate within our town, a crossing point between our world and another. The thought was terrifying, but offered a glimmer of hope. If I could find this gate, perhaps I could rescue my real family. Armed with the fragmented clues, I set out the next morning, tracing paths through town that felt oddly familiar yet distinctly different. As I walked the streets, the entire town seemed to change before my eyes. Neighbors and friends wore the same unsettlingly perfect expressions as Sarah and the kids. Their eyes followed me with veiled suspicion, like predators waiting to pounce. My search led me to an abandoned bookstore on the edge of town. The windows were grimy, and the door creaked ominously as I pushed it open. Inside, dust-covered shelves lined the walls, and the faint smell of mildew hung in the air. I found a spiral staircase leading down into a basement filled with old, forgotten volumes. One book stood out, a worn, leather-bound journal hidden among the dusty tomes. As I flipped through its pages, my surroundings seemed to blur and shift. The journal detailed a hidden gate and the experiences of others who had encountered the parallel universe. Each entry dripped with despair, recounting tales of families changed, loved ones lost to the perfect imposters, and a foreboding warning about the gate's guardians. I felt eyes on me, and when I looked up, a figure stood at the bottom of the stairs, a neighbor I had known for years, but whose gaze now held that same icy coldness. "What are you doing here, Daniel?" His voice was eerily calm. "I could ask you the same thing," I replied, my voice hoarse. "We're all here to protect the truth," he said, stepping closer, his smile growing more sinister with each step. My heart raced as I realized I had to leave immediately. Holding the journal tightly, I bolted up the stairs. The town seemed to close in around me as I ran, every shadow stretching toward me, every face a mocking reflection of normalcy. Back home, I barricaded myself in the study, poring over the journal, trying to decipher the cryptic directions to the hidden gate. Every sound outside the door, every creak of the house, felt like an impending doom. The knowledge that my neighbors and possibly hundreds more in this town were part of the same uncanny conspiracy was overwhelming. Finally, the directions coalesced into something coherent. The gate was hidden in an alleyway downtown, a place I had to reach while evading the watchful eyes of the eerie imposters. With renewed determination, I prepared to confront the horrors that awaited me, knowing that the truth lay out there, and so did the key to saving my family. Setting out under the cover of darkness, I moved stealthily through the back streets, avoiding the fixed stares of my neighbors. Deep down, fear twisted my stomach, but I had to keep moving. I approached the alley, my steps quickening despite the instinctual dread building inside me. As I reached the narrow passage, a foreboding electricity filled the air. Shadows danced along the walls, and the space felt colder, almost tangible with malevolent energy. I found a door at the end marked with strange, otherworldly symbols that seemed to pulse with an eerie light. Taking a deep breath, I placed my hand on the door, and it swung open. Inside was a world twisted in nightmarish echoes of my town. The buildings were familiar but grotesquely exaggerated. The colors were off, the angles wrong. Every reflection in every surface showed a distorted version of myself, leering back at me. Navigating this strange place, I felt something following me. The whispers grew louder, the ground seemed to shift beneath my feet, and the air was thick with dread. Each step forward felt like wading through a fog of malice. Halfway through the alien landscape, I was confronted by figures emerging from the shadows, twisted reflections of people I once knew, now monstrous and hollow. "You don't belong here," one of them hissed, eyes gleaming with dark intent. "I'm not leaving without my family," I shot back, my voice trembling yet resolute. "Your family is ours now," another said, its form melting into a grotesque parody of my wife's face. Desperation fueled my next move. I sprinted towards a faint light in the distance, the whispers growing into a cacophony of mocking laughter. I knew that reaching the light was my only hope, the boundary between this horror and the reality I longed to return to. The chase was nightmarish, but as I reached the threshold of the light, the world around me began to collapse, spiraling into itself with a deafening roar. Just as the darkness threatened to consume me, I lunged for the light, hoping it would lead me back to sanity, or at least offer some glimmer of truth in this twisted parallel dimension. As I hurtled toward the light, the deafening roar around me grew in intensity, almost drowning out my heartbeat, which pounded like a war drum in my ears. The world twisted, contorting into grotesque shapes that clawed at my sanity. Just when I thought I would be swallowed by the darkness, the light enveloped me, and I tumbled into a new, unnerving reality. I found myself in a familiar yet horribly altered version of the town's central square. The buildings loomed impossibly tall, casting long shadows that whispered my name. The air was thick with a sense of impending doom, and my skin prickled with the awareness of being watched. Ahead of me, obscured by the flickering neon lights, stood the gate, a rusted, ancient structure pulsating with an otherworldly energy. The journal's warnings about gate guardians echoed in my mind. I had hoped it was just paranoid fantasies, but as figures began emerging from the shadows, my hope was obliterated. These guardians were nightmarish versions of townspeople, twisted, hollow-eyed beings with elongated limbs and movements like jagged puppetry. They advanced slowly, their whispers forming a united, chilling chorus. "You don't belong here, Daniel," they chanted, their voices a grating hiss. My heart pounded with fear and determination as I clutched the journal tightly in my hands. The path to the gate was clear, but fraught with danger. I had no choice but to fight my way through. Summoning every ounce of courage, I charged forward. The guardians lunged at me, their bony fingers grasping at my clothes and skin. Each touch sent a jolt of icy dread through my body, but I fought back, swinging the journal like a weapon. With each strike, they recoiled, shrieking in unnatural pain. Their forms flickered, momentarily revealing the true nature of their warped existence. The final stretch to the gate felt like an eternity. The guardians' attacks grew more desperate, their whispers more frenzied. Blood pounded in my ears as I swung the journal one last time, breaking through their ranks and lunging for the gate. As I crossed the threshold, an otherworldly force pulled me through, dragging me back into a semblance of my hometown. The transition was dizzying, the world spinning out of control, until I collapsed onto familiar pavement. Gasping for breath, I struggled to my feet, gazing around at the eerily quiet town square. The night sky above me looked deceptively calm, and the buildings, though familiar, felt wrong. I staggered home, only to find the same eerie silence greeting me. The house stood unchanged, but an oppressive weight hung in the air. Pushing open the door, I found Sarah and the children sitting in the living room, their expressions devoid of recognition. My heart sank as their eyes fixed on me with that same chilling coldness. "You finally made it back," Sarah said, her voice lacking warmth. "Welcome home." The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't my Sarah, nor were these my children. I had crossed into their world and had now become the doppelganger. "Where is my real family?" I demanded, my voice a strained whisper. "They're safe, Daniel," she replied with a knowing smile. "Just as you stopped belonging to their world, they no longer belong here." Despair flooded me as I sank into a chair. I had fought so hard, crossed into a realm of nightmares, only to find myself trapped in the wrong reality. The weight of the truth was crushing. I was no longer the man I once was, and this was no longer my world. My real family was out of reach, and I was left to navigate this twisted existence. In a haunting whisper, I accepted my fate. The lines between realities had blurred beyond repair, and I was now part of this parallel world. I looked around at the eerily perfect replicas of my loved ones, haunted by the knowledge that I was now one of them. Forever separated from my true family, I resigned myself to blending into this alien existence, trying to hold on to whatever fragments of my past life remained. Isolation and loss became my new companions, lurking in the shadows of this strange, mirrored universe. The truth was a bitter pill to swallow, but it was mine alone to bear. All that was left was to live each day, haunted by the echoes of a life lost in the shifting currents of reality. The world around me had changed, and I had no choice but to change with it.
The first time I heard them, the whispers were barely a breath, an unintelligible murmur. It wasn't until I saw my own face staring back at me from the darkness that I realized I had stepped into a nightmare. I had always been the curious type, the one who believed in the unseen and chased after mysteries. It was a warm summer evening when the mystery found me. Strolling through town, I noticed a trail at the edge of the woods, a path I had never seen before. Drawn by an inexplicable urge, I stepped onto it. The further I walked, the thicker the air seemed to become, like an unseen force was pressing in on me. A shroud of twilight wrapped itself around the trees, and shadows stretched and twisted as if alive. I felt a chill run down my spine, but continued walking, unable to shake the feeling that I needed to see where this trail led. Eventually, I emerged back into the town, but the world felt different, tangible yet wrong. The silence was the first thing I noticed. No distant hum of cars, no rustling leaves, not even the chirp of crickets. It was as if sound had been siphoned from the environment, leaving only a suffocating void. As I made my way down the street, the familiar houses loomed ominously, bathed in an unnatural twilight. My house stood at the end of the block, just as it always had. But as I approached, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. On the surface, everything seemed normal, yet there was a pressing sense of wrongness that gnawed at me. The paint on my neighbor's fence was chipped in a way I didn't remember, and the flowers in Mrs. Johnson's garden were a different color entirely. I shook my head, trying to dispel the unease, and pushed open my front door. The interior of my home greeted me with an eerie stillness. The familiar creaks of the floorboards seemed absent, replaced by a suffocating quiet that was almost physical. The first night the whispers began, I dismissed them as tricks of the mind, sounds between sleep and wakefulness. But as the nights passed, they grew louder, more insistent. They started as unintelligible murmurs, words that seemed just out of reach. One day, I confided in Dylan, my closest friend since childhood and the most grounded person I knew. We sat in my living room, the air thick with anxiety. "You don't believe me, do you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Dylan leaned forward, a skeptical yet concerned look on his face. "Evie, it's not that I don't believe you. It's just shadows whispering? That's a bit out there." Out of sheer frustration, I invited Maya over. Unlike Dylan, Maya had always been open to the supernatural, running a boutique filled with spiritual items and handmade crafts. Moonlight filtered through the window as Maya listened to my tale with a serious expression, her dark eyes reflecting concern. "We need to explore this further, Evie," she said thoughtfully. "But be cautious. The spirit world is not a place to tread lightly." Night fell again, bringing with it an oppressive quiet that seemed to seep into my bones. Shadows in the corners of my home appeared to stretch, elongate, as the whispers grew louder. I lay in bed, every nerve taut, listening to the encroaching whispers that now seemed to form coherent, ghastly phrases. You can't escape. I bolted upright, cold sweat clinging to my skin. Determined to uncover the truth, I spent the next day researching shadow phenomena and whispering spirits, trying to find answers. Hours passed, but nothing explained the growing dread, the sense of a lurking presence. The following evening, Maya arrived with an array of spiritual tools, candles, incense, and protective charms. As we set up in my living room, the air grew thick with incense smoke, its pungent aroma mingling with the rising tension. "Dylan, you should stay," I insisted, clasping his hand. "I need someone rational here." Reluctantly, he agreed, though I could see doubt shadowing his eyes. As Maya began chanting softly, the shadows flickered, responding to her words. "In the name of light, reveal your truth," Maya intoned, sprinkling salt in a circle around us. At first, it seemed nothing would happen. But then the whispers intensified, forming words that sent a shiver down my spine. Faces flickered within the shadows, twisted and malevolent, their eyes filled with a predatory hunger. And then, out of the darkness, I saw her, me, twisted and malevolent. My doppelganger stared back at me, lips curling into a cruel smile. I gasped, retreating instinctively as Maya's chanting grew louder, more desperate. The shadows writhed and surged, and for a moment, an iron grip of fear paralyzed me. "You can't escape," the distorted version of me whispered, each word dripping with venom and intent. Dylan and Maya both saw it then, the undeniable horror of my double. Dylan's hand tightened around mine, his earlier skepticism dissolving into grim determination. "Whatever you are," Dylan shouted, "you're not taking her." The malevolent figure blinked out of existence, the whispers receding into the silence once more. The encounter left us shaken, but it was undeniable proof. The battle for my very existence had begun. Maya's boutique was filled with an assortment of mystical charms, candles, and spiritual relics. The air was perfumed with the scent of lavender and sandalwood, lending a calming atmosphere that did little to soothe my frayed nerves. After the terrifying encounter with my doppelganger, I sought more answers, more protection. "There's something ancient at work here," Maya said, her voice steady but tinged with worry. She carefully selected items from her shelves, protective amulets, purifying crystals, and herbs known for warding off evil spirits. "We need to perform a stronger ritual to understand what we're dealing with." Dylan, standing near the door with his arms crossed, looked both protective and skeptical. "How do we know it won't just make things worse?" he asked. Maya glanced at me, her eyes filled with conviction. "We don't, but doing nothing is not an option." That night, the three of us prepared for the ritual in my living room. Candles flickered, casting elongated shadows on the walls. Maya chanted in a language I didn't understand, her voice resonating with the air around us. Suddenly, the room grew icy cold. The candle's flames began to flicker violently, and the shadows writhed as if alive. I clutched Dylan's hand, my heart pounding in my chest. From the depths of the darkness, my doppelganger emerged again, this time more tangible, more real. Its eyes burned with malevolent intent, and its twisted smile sent a shiver down my spine. "You're not real," I heard myself saying, my voice trembling with both fear and defiance. "You can't replace me." The double laughed, a chilling sound that resonated deep within me. "I can, and I will." It lunged at me, and for a moment, cold hands grasped at my throat. Panic surged through me as I fought back, kicking and struggling. Dylan stepped in, trying to pull the doppelganger away, but his hands passed through it like mist. The suffocating grip tightened, and black spots danced at the edge of my vision. Maya's chanting grew louder, reaching a fever pitch. The candles flared brightly, and the room was suddenly filled with a blinding light. The grip on my throat released, and the doppelganger shrieked before dissipating into the shadows. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath, my throat raw. Dylan knelt beside me, his face pale and drawn. "Evie, are you okay?" Nodding weakly, I tried to muster a semblance of strength. "We need to end this. I don't know how much more I can take." The next night was the ultimate test. We had a plan, a spell that Maya assured us would sever the connection between me and the malevolent entity. It was risky, but it was all we had. As we began the spell, the shadows gathered, more aggressive than ever. My doppelganger appeared, its face twisted with rage. "You can't win," it hissed, advancing towards me. I held my ground, the protective amulet firmly in my grasp. Maya continued chanting, her voice unwavering. Dylan stood beside me carrying a makeshift weapon, his eyes steely with determination. The doppelganger lunged again, and this time I was ready. I thrust the amulet forward, the charm glowing with a brilliant light. The entity screamed in agony, its form flickering and distorting. For a split second, I saw a glimpse of something even more sinister behind the doppelganger, a dark shape with glowing eyes. Then, with a final, ear-piercing shriek, the doppelganger vanished. The shadows recoiled, and the oppressive darkness lifted. The candles flickered out, leaving us in silence. I sank to my knees, trembling with exhaustion and relief. "Is it over?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Maya placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "For now, but be vigilant, Evie. The parallel world's grasp doesn't let go easily." Dylan helped me to my feet, and we shared a look of cautious optimism. The sense of foreboding remained, but for the first time in what felt like forever, I had hope. We would get through this, together. We decided that the only way to end this nightmare once and for all was to find the source in the woods where it all started. The darkness of the trail loomed ahead, shrouded in mystery and foreboding. As we approached the entrance, the familiar sense of unease settled over us like a heavy cloud. "This is it," Dylan said, his voice resolute. "We finish this tonight." Maya nodded, holding her bundle of protective charms tightly. "Remember, stick together, no matter what happens." With a collective breath, we stepped into the woods. The air grew colder with each step, the shadows stretching unnaturally as if alive. The trail seemed to close in around us, constricting and oppressive. Halfway through, the whispers returned, louder and more coherent. They spoke in sinister tones, promising doom, tormenting us with half-formed sentences. Fear clenched my heart, but I pressed on, determined to end this once and for all. As we reached the clearing where I first emerged into this nightmare, my doppelganger materialized, more solid and menacing than ever. Its eyes bore into mine, filled with dark intent. "This is where you belong," it hissed. Dylan stepped forward, brandishing his makeshift weapon. "Back off!" The doppelganger sneered, and with a flick of its hand, Dylan was thrown back against a tree, gasping in pain. My heart raced as I saw Maya step forward, chanting a spell of banishment. The shadows writhed in response, and my double advanced on her. "No!" I screamed, running towards them with the protective amulet raised high. I felt a surge of energy as the charm glowed, a force more potent than I had ever felt before. The doppelganger turned its gaze towards me, eyes burning with rage. "You can't escape what you are." Summoning every ounce of courage, I thrust the amulet towards the malevolent figure. Light poured from it, blinding and intense, enveloping the entity in a searing glow. The doppelganger shrieked, its form flickering and distorting, trying to resist the force pulling it back into the darkness. "This ends now," I cried out, my voice echoing with determination. With a final, ear-splitting scream, the doppelganger disintegrated, the shadows dissipating into thin air. The oppressive darkness lifted, replaced by an eerie calm. Maya and Dylan staggered to their feet, their expressions a mix of relief and exhaustion. "It's over," Maya said, her voice filled with a weary triumph. "You did it, Evie." I wanted to believe her, but a lingering sense of unease gnawed at me. We carefully made our way back out of the woods, the trail seemingly lighter, less foreboding. The quiet of the town greeted us, almost welcoming, a stark contrast to the nightmare we just faced. Back at home, the whispers had ceased. A sense of normalcy started to return. I could laugh with Dylan again, discuss spirituality with Maya without the weight of impending doom. Yet a small part of me remained vigilant, forever changed by the ordeal. One night, weeks later, I sat in my living room, a book in hand, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't felt in ages. The house was quiet, truly quiet. I allowed myself to relax, to believe it was finally over. But just as I was about to drift into an uneasy sleep, I heard it, a faint, barely audible whisper. My heart pounded in my chest as the sound grew closer, more familiar. "We're always here." I bolted upright, the book falling from my hands. The room seemed darker, the shadows longer, the oppressive weight of dread returning. I knew then that while I had escaped the immediate danger, the parallel world had left its mark on me. The whispers would never truly leave, a constant reminder that some doors once opened can never be fully closed. As I sat there, bathed in the dim light of my living room, I realized that my life would forever be a balance between light and shadow, vigilance and peace. And in that delicate balance, I found a new kind of strength, a resolute determination to live despite the lingering whispers. The nightmare had ended, but the echoes of the parallel world remained, forever reminding me of the darkness that lurked just beyond the veil of reality.
Part 1. Echoes of Silence. Silence enveloped the town like a shroud, and with it came an unsettling truth. The world I woke up to was no longer my own. Alone in the stillness, I was about to uncover a nightmare beyond comprehension. The first thing that struck me was the silence. It wasn't the comforting, peaceful silence before dawn, but something far more intrusive and eerie. I sat up in bed, confusion seeping through my groggy mind. The usual morning symphony, birds chirping, cars rumbling in the distance, the hum of life, was conspicuously absent. I rubbed my eyes and glanced out the window. The familiar sight of Main Street was still there, but it seemed off. Trees swayed, leaves rustling in the early morning breeze, yet no sound accompanied their dance. My heart started to pound as I reluctantly pulled the covers off myself and placed my feet on the cold floor. A quick scan of my modest bedroom revealed nothing unusual. My scattered notebooks, the desk lamp, and the infinity symbol tattoo just visible on my wrist, all as they should be. I quickly dressed in my favorite pair of jeans, a fitted t-shirt, and threw on my leather jacket. Something was very wrong, and I was determined to find out what. Stepping outside, the quiet hit me like a brick. The wind kissed my cheeks but remained voiceless. I walked down the street, the sound of my sneakers hitting the pavement strangely muted. Eyes peered at me from behind curtains, and mechanical figures shuffled along, each ignoring the unsettling quiet. I reached the town square, my sanctuary since childhood, now wrapped in unnatural silence. Sitting by the fountain, I tried to process the world's oddity when something caught my eye. The town library door was ajar. My investigative instincts kicked in, and I headed towards it, the weight of the silence growing heavier with each step. As I pushed the door open, a chill ran down my spine. The library was dimly lit, its vast collection of books seemingly untouched. Dust particles floated in shafts of light, undisturbed and frozen in time. I walked between the towering shelves, my eyes scanning the seemingly endless rows when I noticed something peculiar. The books bore my name. Gripped by a mix of fear and curiosity, I pulled one out. The cover was blank, and the pages felt oddly warm. As I flipped through, my heart sank. These were my memories, intricately detailed, chronicling moments of my life that no one else could possibly know. My first day of kindergarten, the time I broke my arm climbing a tree, and even my darkest, most private thoughts laid bare in ink. I closed the book abruptly, my breathing ragged. With trembling hands, I returned the book to its place and reached for another. Same story, different details. Each book I pulled out was a mirror reflecting my life back at me. My sense of reality began to unravel as I felt a presence behind me. Turning swiftly, I found nothing but empty aisles. An unnatural chill ran down my spine, the silence now a living, breathing entity pressing down on me. With each step back towards the door, the sensation grew. I felt watched, scrutinized in ways I couldn't comprehend. As I exited the library, I spotted movement from the corner of my eye. There, at the edge of the park, stood Danny Hughes, his expressive blue eyes wide with confusion. He had been my rock since childhood, and seeing him now brought a sliver of hope. He looked as disoriented as I felt, and together we might find some answers. Evelyn? Danny's voice broke the silence, softer than usual, strained with fear. He approached cautiously, his sandy blonde hair tousled by the voiceless wind. Danny, thank goodness, I replied, relief evident in my voice. Do you hear it? The silence? He nodded, a troubled expression crossing his face. It's everywhere. Nothing makes a sound. I've tried speaking with people, but they just stare blankly. We stood together, our eyes scanning the hollow streets. I found something in the library, I whispered, as if afraid to disturb the oppressive quiet. Books. About every detail of my life written down. Danny's eyes narrowed, concern etched on his face. That's impossible. Who could know all of that? I shook my head, the cold tendrils of fear wrapping tighter around my heart. I don't know, Danny, but we need to find out. This silence, it's not natural. Something is very, very wrong. Together, we started our search, the weight of the silent world pressing down on us with every step. We didn't know where to start, but the need to unravel the mystery drove us forward. In the eerie, soundless realm, Danny's presence was a lifeline, anchoring me to the fragments of normality. We ventured deeper into the forsaken town, each discovery pulling us further into the heart of the unsettling enigma that ensnared us. Little did we know, our exploration was only the beginning of a nightmare that would defy comprehension and test the very fabric of our sanity. Part 2. Echoes of silence. With Danny by my side, the weight of the silence felt slightly more bearable, though the oppressive quiet continued to gnaw at our sanity. We decided to head back to my place. It was the closest and perhaps might hold some clues. The journey there was surreal, each step a painful reminder of the unsettling world we were now trapped in. Inside my house, everything was as I left it, the pictures on the wall, the soft hum of the refrigerator. Only now, even that was gone. Danny slumped into a chair at the kitchen table, running a hand through his tousled hair. I rummaged through my things, looking for anything that might explain this nightmare. That's when it happened. As I glanced at the mirror in the hallway, my reflection did something it shouldn't have. It didn't follow my movements, it lagged behind, and then its eyes met mine with an eerie understanding. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The doppelganger in the mirror smirked, a chilling, knowing expression that sent shivers down my spine. Evelyn? Danny's concerned voice brought me back. I tore my gaze away from the mirror and faced him, but the image of my sinister double was burned into my mind. "We have bigger problems," I whispered, my voice shaky. I think there's something in the mirror. It's like my reflection, but it's not me." Danny stood up, his expression serious. "Show me." I led him back to the hallway, pointing at the now empty mirror. The sinister smirk was gone, replaced by my usual, albeit terrified reflection. Danny watched closely, but nothing happened. He sighed, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "Maybe we're just on edge," he suggested, trying to convince both of us. "This whole silence thing is messing with our heads." I wanted to believe that, but the memory of those cold, knowing eyes wouldn't leave. "Maybe," I muttered, unconvinced. "Let's keep looking." We decided to reach out for help. It was late afternoon, and we figured that Dr. Lila Whitmore might have some answers. She was an expert in the unexplained, a psychologist who also delved into the paranormal. Her office was on the other side of town. The journey there felt like walking through a deserted ghost town. When we arrived, Dr. Whitmore greeted us with a mix of relief and worry. Her office had been a sanctuary for troubled minds, but now it held a different kind of tension, the silent kind. She ushered us in, her face etched with concern. "Leela, something is terribly wrong," I started, recounting our experiences. She listened intently, her dark brown eyes never leaving mine. After I finished, she sat back, her expression thoughtful. "This silence, the reflections acting independently, it's as if something on the other side is manipulating reality," she said slowly. "Normal psychological principles may not apply here. We might be dealing with something supernatural." I glanced at Danny, who looked equally worried. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with fear. Dr. Whitmore leaned forward, her gaze serious. "We need to understand it first. The oppressive silence, the behavior of your reflection, they suggest an entity feeding off fear and despair. It's creating an alternate reality to trap us." The weight of her words sank in. We were indeed trapped, but now we had a sliver of understanding. The journey to this realization had been fraught with tension, but it armed us with knowledge, the first step in fighting back. We spent hours in her office, delving into research and discussing theories. The more we learned, the clearer it became that we were up against an insidious force that thrived on our deepest fears. Shadows seemed to grow longer, whispering cruel secrets that only we could hear. The atmosphere grew thicker with each passing minute, and the ever-present silence felt like a noose tightening around our necks. Returning to my house felt almost unbearable, but we knew we had to confront whatever was lurking there. Armed with Dr. Whitmore's insights, we entered with caution. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached the mirror once more. This time, I was prepared. Instead of mirroring my movements, my doppelganger stood still, watching me with those same malevolent eyes. Summoning every ounce of courage, I confronted it, my voice barely a whisper. "What do you want?" It smirked again, and suddenly the oppressive silence gave way to a voice in my mind, cruel and taunting. "You'll never escape. This world is mine now. You belong to it." Fear gripped me, but I fought to maintain control. "No, we don't. We will find a way out." Danny and Dr. Whitmore stood behind me, their presence a silent support. As the words left my mouth, the reflection's smirk faded, and for a moment it looked almost afraid. We had made our first stand against the malevolent force, but the battle was far from over. The silence might have surrounded us, but now we understood it. The oppressive quiet, the eerie reflections, they were tools of a dark entity that fed off our fear. We were determined to fight back, to unravel the mystery of this silent world and reclaim our reality. The path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty and terror, but together we braced ourselves for the trials to come. Part 3. Echoes of Silence. The decision to confront the force behind the silence grew clearer as the days wore on. Each moment was a stab of dread, each silence louder than any noise could ever be. Dr. F. Whitmore had pinpointed a decaying building at the edge of town, a place that seemed to pulse with a dark energy. The journey to the building was surreal, the oppressive quiet challenging our every step. Danny, Dr. Whitmore, and I stood before the crumbling structure, its facade twisted by time and malevolence. The air thrummed with dark potential. "We stick together," Danny said, his voice steady but eyes intense. I nodded, clutching a flashlight tightly. Dr. Whitmore led the way, her calm composure a stark contrast to the turmoil inside each of us. Inside, the building smelled of rot and decay, dark corners alive with whispers. My flashlight cast erratic shadows and the silence grew heavier. Every step echoed in my mind, amplifying the fear that had settled in my bones. We found ourselves at the core of the building, a large room with walls covered in unsettling symbols and dark reflections. My doppelganger stood at the center, waiting. It looked more real, more solid than ever, and behind it loomed an unseen presence, a palpable force that sucked the air out of the room. "So you finally came," the doppelganger sneered, its voice a twisted version of my own. "Ready to accept your fate?" "No," I replied, my voice stronger than I felt. "We're here to reclaim our reality." The room seemed to shudder with our defiance. Danny and Dr. Whitmore flanked me, their determination evident. The confrontation began with a clash of wills, the air thick with potent energy that crackled and sparked. "Stay back!" I shouted, advancing on my double. It mirrored my movements, but there was a flicker of fear in its eyes. The entity behind it roared silently, shadows coalescing and writhing angrily. The force pressed down on me, the weight of countless fears and despairs. Memories and regrets assaulted my mind, but I pushed through, focusing on one single thought: breaking free. The doppelganger laughed cruelly, but I stepped closer, its image wavering. "You are a puppet," I declared, "and we're cutting your strings." The entity's roar intensified, and for a moment, reality bent. Danny shouted something, but the words were lost in the silence. I felt a hand on my shoulder, Dr. Whitmore. She whispered something that cut through the chaos, grounding me. With a monumental effort, I reached out and touched the doppelganger. Its form rippled, and a horrifying realization settled in. It was as terrified as we were. The oppressive silence shattered with a scream that tore through my mind, the doppelganger's resistance crumbling. Darkness surged, and I was engulfed in a battle of wills, fighting the entity's grip on my soul. Visions of despair, of lives lost in fear, bombarded me, but a flicker of hope, the faces of Danny and Dr. Whitmore, guided me. With a final desperate push, I shattered the hold. The doppelganger screamed, its visage splitting and dissolving into nothingness. The force retreated, the darkness fading. I collapsed, the silence lifting, replaced by the faint sounds of the world returning. As I lay on the cold floor, reality began to solidify. Danny's voice broke through the haze, warm and urgent. "Evelyn, Evelyn, are you okay?" I managed a nod, feeling the oppressive weight lift. Dr. Whitmore's hand tightened around mine, a silent promise of survival. We stumbled out of the building, the bleak gray of dawn stretching before us. The silence had lost its edge, replaced by a gentle hum of life. Relief mingled with exhaustion as we made our way back to town. But as we approached, something felt off. The whispering shadows seemed to linger, a constant reminder of the battle we had fought. Whispers of fear and despair danced in the corners of my mind, a permanent scar from the encounter. We had escaped, but the victory was bittersweet. The realization settled heavily. I was changed. We were all changed. The world we returned to was no longer the one we left, and the darkness we faced had left its mark. In the days that followed, life tried to pick up where it left off. Danny's presence was a constant reassurance, his loyalty unshaken. Dr. Whitmore's insights became invaluable, guiding us through the aftermath of our ordeal. But every now and then, in a fleeting reflection or a brief moment of silence, I could feel it. The eyes watching, the whispers waiting. We had broken free from the silent world, but its echoes haunted us still. Reality had shifted, leaving an indelible mark. We would live with the knowledge and the scars, forever vigilant against the quiet places where shadows whispered and silence waited.
There is a fine line between reality and nightmare. One I crossed when I woke up in a town stripped of all sound, every corner oozing with an unearthly stillness. My name is Karen Miller, and this is the story of how I came to lose faith in the reality we take for granted. The day began like any other, mundane and exhaustingly routine. After a tedious day cataloging dusty books at the library, I was more than ready to crawl into bed and escape into sleep. As I drifted off, I couldn't have imagined the nightmarish world I would awaken to. When I opened my eyes, something was immediately off. The morning light filtered through my bedroom window, casting familiar shadows, yet the silence was suffocatingly thick. Rolling over, I noticed small, disconcerting changes. My bedside lamp was on the wrong side, my neatly stacked books were toppled over, and the usually loud hum of my heater was nowhere to be heard. "Michael?" My voice came out in a hollow whisper, but no reply came. My heart pounded as I slipped out of bed, feeling the weight of the silence pressing against my eardrums. I ventured out into the hallway, the air heavy and oppressive. Everything looked almost normal, yet something was deeply wrong. I got to the kitchen and found my morning coffee had already been brewed, steam rising from the pot without a sound. Stepping outside, the world fell into a disquieting tableau. My street was lined with familiar houses, but the windows seemed like vacant eyes staring back at me. Not a single sound punctuated the eerie stillness. Not the usual morning bird songs, not the distant hum of cars. Nothing. The trees swayed gently, but with no rustle of leaves to accompany them. "Hello," I called out, the desperation clear in my voice, but only the silent void answered back. I walked aimlessly through my neighborhood, a palpable sense of dread growing with each step. Then I saw them, the townspeople, moving through their routines with a disturbingly mechanical precision. Mrs. Thompson, usually chatty and warm, was tending her garden with vacant, emotionless eyes. Mr. Anders, normally gruff but affable, shuffled down his driveway like an automaton. "Hi, Mrs. Thompson," I waved, my hand trembling slightly. She turned her head slowly to face me, her eyes devoid of any recognition or warmth. Chills ran down my spine as she simply stared before resuming her task, utterly silent. Panicking, I rushed towards the town square, hoping to find someone, anyone, who could explain what was happening. That's when I noticed the watchers. They stood in front of the stores and main buildings, eyes dull yet piercing, following my every move. Their presence was overpowering, their silence a relentless assault on my sanity. In the town square, I attempted to speak to several people, but all I received were those same blank stares. I felt like a ghost, screaming into a deafening void where no one could hear me. Then I saw the library, its door ajar, beckoning me to enter. Swallowing my terror, I stepped inside. The air was thick with dust, books stacked haphazardly. It was there, among the neglected shelves, that I found an old, dog-eared journal lying open on the table. The pages were yellowed, the ink faded, but the words startled me into stark clarity. "Those who cross over shall never return." My heart thundered in my chest as I read the accounts of others who had found themselves in this mirror world, recounting tales of being observed by hollow-eyed figures and slowly losing themselves to the oppressive silence. As I closed the journal, I knew one thing with horrifying certainty. I had to escape this nightmarish version of my town. But first, I needed to understand it, understand the watchers and the silence that suffused every inch of this twisted reality. The suffocating dread threatened to swallow me whole, but I forced myself to remain focused. My first step was clear. Find anyone who could still speak, still remember, still fight against this silent town. Desperation gnawed at me as I made my way through the disconcertingly familiar streets. The silent watcher's relentless gaze bore into me, heightening my urgency. It wasn't long before I found myself gravitating toward my own house, or rather, the house that should have been mine. I approached it cautiously, each step feeling like a plunge into an icy abyss. My hand trembled as I turned the doorknob, pushing it open to reveal an interior that mirrored mine, but with subtle, jarring differences. And there she was, my doppelganger, sitting at the kitchen table, sipping on a cup of coffee. It was as if she had stepped out of my reality and slipped into this one effortlessly. Seeing her threw my mind into a whirlpool of confusion and fear. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice breaking the oppressive silence. "What is this place?" She looked up at me, and for a moment a flicker of understanding crossed her face. But then, just as quickly, her eyes became blank, and her expression matched the detached stillness of everyone else in this cursed town. The coffee cup clinked against the table without a sound as she continued her charade of normalcy. Anger and fear clashed within me, driving me out of the house and into the town square once more. There had to be a way out. I refused to believe that all hope was lost. Staring at the library, an idea took root, and I rushed back inside, fighting against the mounting sense of dread. Frantically searching through the shelves, I found another old, weathered journal. This one held more fragmented, desperate entries from those who had been trapped here. My heart sank as I read their words, each page dampened by hopelessness. But one entry caught my eye, a fleeting mention of a mirror, hidden and ancient, capable of bridging the gulf between realities. My hope was rekindled, a fragile, flickering light in the darkness. The mirror could be my way out. With renewed determination, I sought out the final pieces of this puzzle, skimming through entries that hinted and nudged towards its location. As I absorbed the journal's contents, I noticed a familiar name, Michael Thompson. Memories of our shared past flooded back, and I clung to the possibility that he might also be ensnared in this nightmare. If anyone else could understand and help me, it would be him. My focus shifted to finding Michael, and I retraced steps towards his old house. It was one of the few places that still felt like a sanctuary in this warped town. I hesitated on the porch, summoning the courage to knock. Uncertainty gnawed at me. What version of him would I find? When the door creaked open, my eyes met the familiar yet strained face of my childhood friend. His eyes held the weariness of someone caught in an unending storm, but they softened with recognition. "Michael, thank God," I whispered, relief washing over me. "You remember me, right?" His face flickered with confusion before clarity dawned in his eyes. "Karen? What's happening?" After explaining the bizarre situation, his bewilderment morphed into resolve. Together, we pored over the journal, piecing together bits of information about the Watchers and the arcane mirror. "I know where we might find it," Michael said, his voice firm. "There's an old, abandoned part of town. If the journal's right, the mirror should be there." As we prepared to leave, he handed me a flashlight and a small, pocket-sized weapon, more a reassurance than a real means of defense. With these meager tools, we set out into the heart of the silent town, each step heavy with the weight of impending discovery and danger. Reaching the old district was a descent into another layer of the nightmare. The buildings leaned precariously, windows shattered, and shadows seemed to reach for us. The Watchers intensified their scrutiny, making our every move feel like a transgression. Panic threatened to overtake us, but Michael's steady presence kept me grounded. We approached the abandoned building mentioned in the journal. It stood dilapidated yet imposing, its decayed facade concealing the secrets within. As we stepped inside, the air grew colder, and the silence became tangible, pressing down on us. Navigating the darkened corridors, we finally reached a room that held an ancient, ornate mirror. Its frame was wrought with intricate designs, almost mesmerizing. My heart pounded as I stood before it. the reflective surface offering a distorted image of myself. "This is it," Michael whispered. "This has to be the way out." The Watcher's presence loomed closer, their intent clear. They wanted to stop us, to keep us trapped in this lifeless husk of reality. Summoning every ounce of courage, I reached out and touched the mirror, hoping it would bridge the gulf between the worlds. My reflection rippled and contorted, the mirror's cold surface pulling at my very essence. Pain shot through me as reality twisted and warped. I clung to the hope of returning to my world, fighting against the darkness that sought to consume me. Suddenly, a final, overwhelming surge of agony coursed through my body, and everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was back in my bedroom, the familiar surroundings feeling alien in their ordinariness. The silence that had been so oppressive in the alternate town now seemed to linger in my ears, a disturbing reminder of where I had been. I sat up, trying to shake off the sense of unease clinging to me. Everything in the room was as it should have been. My bedside lamp on the correct side, my books neatly stacked, but the air still felt heavy, almost damp with an unseen presence. I took a deep breath, hoping to dispel the feeling, and made my way to the kitchen. The sight of freshly brewed coffee brought a semblance of normalcy, though a nagging doubt lingered in the back of my mind. As I reached for the cup, I noticed my hands trembling slightly, a reflection of the inner turmoil I felt. The return to my reality was supposed to be a relief, yet something continued to gnaw at me. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to shift, whispering secrets that evaded my comprehension. Determined to reclaim my life, I ventured outside. The morning was crisp and cool, birds singing their usual songs, a stark contrast to the silence I had escaped. I was greeted by familiar faces, their expressions warm and lively. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were still watching me, evaluating my every move from the cover of darkness. I walked to Michael's house, needing the assurance of his presence. When he opened the door, his eyes met mine with a mixture of relief and concern. "You made it back," he said, pulling me into a tight embrace. "Yes, but it doesn't feel right," I whispered, my voice breaking slightly. We spent the morning recounting our experiences, trying to find solace in each other's company. However, the normalcy of his behavior only served to highlight the disquiet that had taken root within me. I couldn't shake the oppressive feeling, the lingering dread that clenched at my chest. It was that night when the true horror revealed itself. As I settled into bed, exhaustion pulling at my eyelids, I noticed the shadows in my room behaving strangely. They seemed to reach out, elongating and whispering in hushed, incomprehensible tones. My heart raced, cold sweat beating on my forehead as I turned on my bedside lamp. The shadows retreated, but the whispers remained, gnawing at the edge of my sanity. The Watchers were still with me. Somehow, pieces of that twisted reality had followed me back, merging with my world. I lay there, paralyzed by the realization that escape was never truly an option. They had marked me, a part of me remaining tethered to the silent town. Michael came over the next morning, concern etched in his features. "You look like you haven't slept. What happened?" "The shadows," I said, my voice trembling. "They're here. The Watchers, they followed me back." His face paled, the weight of our shared ordeal settling between us. We spent hours poring over the journals again, trying to find an explanation, a solution. But the truth was stark and unforgiving. I would never fully escape the silent town. Days turned into weeks, the oppressive presence of the Watchers, an ever-present shadow in my life. The once comforting silence of my home now bore a sinister edge, each whisper a reminder of the alternate reality that had claimed a part of me. One night, as I lay in bed staring at the shifting shadows, I realized I had become a bridge between two worlds. The Watchers were waiting, watching for the moment I would falter, waiting for me to slip back into their grasp. The line between my reality and the nightmare realm had blurred irrevocably. Sometimes, in the dead of night, when the whispers grew too loud to ignore, I stood before the mirror in my bedroom, half expecting its surface to ripple and pull me back into the silent void. The unyielding reflection stared back, a reminder that I was marked by the town, my reality forever tainted by its haunting presence. There is no escape from the silent town. It lingers in the shadows, whispers in the silence, waiting patiently for my return. And I know, deep down, that one day it will call me back. It's been days since I began to notice the shadows moving on their own, whispering secrets that gradually unraveled my sanity. At first, I thought it was stress. Long hours at the office and the weight of personal losses. It wouldn't have been a stretch to imagine I was hallucinating. But everything changed the moment I came across that mirror. It was a particularly dreary Wednesday afternoon when I decided to take a walk, hoping the fresh air might clear my mind. Wandering aimlessly through downtown's labyrinthine streets, I stumbled upon a forgotten alleyway I'd never noticed before. Tucked away in its shadowy recesses was an old curiosity shop, its window display a cluttered array of forgotten relics. Drawn by morbid curiosity, I pushed open the creaky door. The interior was dimly lit, dust motes dancing in the beams of light that pierced through cobweb-covered windows. Each shelf overflowed with trinkets, antiques, and peculiar oddities. My gaze fell upon an ornate mirror, its frame embellished with intricate designs and coated in a thick layer of dust that hinted at years of neglect. The shopkeeper, a gaunt figure with sunken eyes, seemed to materialize out of nowhere. "Interesting choice," he murmured, his voice barely more than a whisper. "That mirror has quite the history. Many have found themselves engrossed by its allure." I should have heeded the curious, almost foreboding tone in his words, but I didn't. Instead, I found myself entranced by the mirror's surface, its reflection shimmering eerily despite the lack of direct light. Ignoring the man's warnings, I purchased the mirror and carried it back to my apartment, driven by a bizarre yet unshakable fascination. That night, as I unpacked my find and positioned it on the wall, an odd chill crept up my spine. The moment my fingers brushed against its surface, a distorted ripple coursed through reality, and I felt a sickening lurch. When I opened my eyes, everything seemed off. My apartment was identical, yet subtly wrong. Colors muted, the ambiance eerily oppressive. Brushing it off as exhaustion, I tried to sleep. That's when the whispering started. Low, indistinct murmurs seemed to emanate from the corners of my room. At first, I convinced myself it was the wind, but the persistence and clarity of the whispers grew. "Come closer," the shadows urged. "Learn the truth." Morning brought no solace. The shadows seemed thicker and their whispers more insistent. I found myself drawn to a particularly dark shadow lurking in the living room corner, its form almost tangible. As I approached it, the whispers intensified, forming coherent words that sent chills down my spine. "He will betray you." I recoiled in terror, unwilling to digest the cryptic message. My immediate thought was of Jason, my boyfriend, and the man I had relied on since my mother's passing. Distrusting the shadows, I texted him, hoping to find normalcy in his voice, but the unease gnawed at my sanity. Trying to shake off the dread, I went to meet Sophie, my best friend, hoping her vibrant energy could dispel my darkening mood. We met at a cafe, a seemingly normal place tainted by the shadows' relentless whispers. As we sipped our coffees, Sophie chattered about trivialities, but the shadows around her revealed darker truths. "She envies you," they hissed. "She plots behind your back." I brushed them off, determined to believe it was my mind playing tricks. However, the longer we talked, the more I noticed subtle shifts in her demeanor, cruel undertones in her seemingly harmless comments. The final straw came when Sophie dropped her facade momentarily, her eyes flickering with a coldness I had never seen before. Doubt slammed into me like a freight train. The whispering shadows may have distorted my reality, but they had unveiled a hidden layer of betrayal around me. Rising from my seat, I left Sophie bewildered at the table. My breath came in short gasps as I walked away, shadows clinging to my every step, their revelations echoing in my mind. My world, my reality was cracking, and I was teetering on the edge of sanity, drawn into an abyss where shadows revealed truths too dark to face. The confrontation with Sophie had shaken me to my core, but it wasn't enough to deter me from seeking the truth. Every day the shadows grew bolder, their whispers more coherent, filling my mind with insidious doubts. Despite my growing paranoia, I knew I needed to confront Jason next. I needed to uncover what the shadows were desperately trying to show me. Jason's apartment felt like a fortress, a place where I had always found comfort. As I walked through the door, the shadows seemed to follow, lingering in the corners, watching. Jason greeted me with his usual warmth, but something was off. His smile seemed a bit too forced, his eyes a little too evasive. We settled on the couch, making small talk, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The shadows around him whispered incessantly, their voices rising to an almost deafening crescendo. He hides something. He isn't what he seems. My heart pounded in my chest as I carefully broached the subject. Jason, I began, my voice trembling. Have you ever felt different? Like something's not right? He looked at me, confusion clouding his eyes. What are you talking about, Emily? The shadows around him twisted and snarled as they whispered, Ask him about the nights he's been away. Summoning what little courage I had left, I pressed on. Where have you been the last few nights? You've been different. His face darkened, and for a brief moment the mask slipped. Anger flickered across his features, and the shadows grew louder, their whispers turning into a cacophony. Don't trust him. He's dangerous. I've been working late, he said, his voice strained, each word a lie. You know how it is. Every instinct screamed for me to flee, but I stood my ground. I think you're lying to me, Jason. The shadows, they're telling me things I can't ignore. His expression shifted, fear now etched across his face. Emily, you're not making any sense. Maybe you're just stressed. But it was too late. The shadows had unraveled enough of the truth, tugging at the strings of my sanity. I realized that the man I thought I knew so well was hiding something, and the shadows were exposing him for what he truly was. With my trust in Jason shattered, I retreated to my apartment, desperate for answers, for any semblance of sanity. The weekend passed in a blur of whispered secrets and growing paranoia. By Monday, I was a fragile mess, barely holding on to my grip on reality. That night, the shadows became more aggressive. I was lying in bed, teetering on the edge of sleep when their whispers grew louder, demanding attention. Face us. Learn the truth. Desperation clawed at my chest as I stood, my legs unsteady. The shadows in my bedroom twisted into grotesque forms, their whispers now a relentless chant. As I approached the darkest corner of the room, my reflection in the mirror twisted and distorted, a malicious grin spreading across its face. The room spun, and I could barely distinguish reality from illusion. Exhausted and on the brink of collapse, I sank to my knees, clutching my head as the whispers overwhelmed me. You must confront him. He hides in the darkness. In the dim light, my shadow on the wall seemed to loom larger, darker, as if waiting for me to acknowledge its existence. The room's air turned thick and suffocating, shadows moving in tandem with my labored breaths. My mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of sanity left. The shadows, they were part of me, parts that I had ignored or denied. Now, they demanded to be heard. I found myself entranced by the largest shadow in the hallway. Its form writhed and morphed, almost as if it were struggling to break free from the wall. I approached it, my heart in my throat, hands trembling. As I got closer, the shadows whispered a singular, terrifying demand. Sacrifice. A cold realization hit me. I had to give up something, a part of myself, to understand and possibly escape this twisted reality. Trembling, I sat, reached out towards the shadow, feeling its cold, almost tangible presence. It enveloped me, a wave of cold darkness, pulling me deeper into its grasp. I screamed, the sound muffled by the oppressive darkness. My reflection in the mirror watched with a sinister satisfaction, my eyes wide with terror. The shadows clung to me, whispering secrets I could barely comprehend, vying for control over my fractured mind. The world around me distorted further, each whisper eroding the remaining shreds of my sanity. I was losing myself to the shadows, becoming entangled in their whispers, their secrets, their darkness. Every step I took felt like a descent into an abyss from which I might never return. The sacrifice was inevitable. The shadows wouldn't let go, and neither would the dark truths they harbored. Staring into the twisted reflection in front of me, I understood that to escape, I had to confront and accept the darkest part of myself. The shadows representing my hidden fears and unspoken truths demanded acknowledgement. Taking a deep breath, I whispered to them, "Tell me what you want." The shadows coalesced, forming a grotesque figure that mirrored my own silhouette, but with eyes that burned like embers. "You must embrace the darkness within," it hissed. My own voice, distorted and filled with malice. "Only then can you find the way out." Trembling, I stepped forward, pressing my hand against the cold, sinister form. As I did, memories and emotions flooded through me, resentment, envy, anger, and pain that I had buried deep within. The shadows drew these emotions forth, each whisper slicing through my soul. A suffocating pressure engulfed me, and I felt my consciousness slipping. I was no longer just Emily. I was part of the shadows. We moved as one, our memories tangled, our fears intertwined. There was no escape from this nightmare unless I accepted the totality of my existence. "You must give us a part of yourself," the shadow hissed, pulling me deeper into its dark embrace. "Surrender the light you cling to so desperately." With each breath, a part of me faded into the shadow's embrace, my hope, my innocence, my light. I felt myself unraveling, merging with the darkness, becoming one with the whispers. The sacrifice was excruciating, but it was the only way to find release. As I surrendered, the shadows around me shifted, their malevolence softening. My reflection in the mirror began to clear, my face no longer twisted but stoic and weary. The whispers quieted, turning into a haunting melody that wrapped around my soul. The mirror in front of me transformed, no longer a portal of malevolence but a gateway back to my original reality. Summoning the last of my strength, I stepped through, the sensation of cold shadows clinging to me until I was back in my dimly lit apartment. Everything was as it had been, yet profoundly different. The shadows in my apartment were just shadows, silent, still. The mirror hung on the wall, a mere object now, stripped of its power. But I was forever changed. I had left a part of myself behind in that parallel world, a sacrifice to the whispering shadows. I dropped to my knees, tears streaming down my face. The overwhelming quiet consumed me. No whispers, no shadows moving of their own volition. I was alone with my thoughts, haunted by the memories of what I had lost, the part of myself I had surrendered. The days that followed felt like an eternity. The world around me resumed its normalcy, but I couldn't shake the darkness that lingered inside. I avoided mirrors, fearing the reflection might show a glimpse of the shadowy entity I had become entwined with. Friends and loved ones noticed my change, the distant look in my eyes, the way I recoiled from deep conversations. Sophie, oblivious to the depths of my experience, continued with her life, our friendship forever altered by the shadow's revelations. Jason, unaware of my torment, remained a looming figure in my mind, a reminder of the deceit and darkness I had uncovered. Sleep eluded me, each night plagued by dreams of the shadow world. The whispers, though faint and distant, called to me from the corners of my mind, a lingering reminder of the sacrifice I had made. The price of escape was steep, and the shadow's grip on my soul was eternal. One night, as the moonlight filtered through the curtains, I found myself standing before the mirror again. The reflection staring back at me was one of sorrow and acceptance. I knew then that the shadows had left an indelible mark, a darkness I would carry forever. But amid the darkness, there was clarity. The whispering shadows had exposed truths I needed to face, parts of myself I had long denied. Their malevolence had forced me to confront my own inner demons and come to terms with my fractured soul. As I turned away from the mirror, a glimmer of resolve hardened within me. I couldn't change the past, nor erase the shadow's influence, but I could find a way to live with it. I could seek solace in understanding the darkness that dwelled within and use it to navigate the labyrinth of my life. The world continued moving, shadows cast by the sun and moon mere distortions, their whispers muted but never forgotten. I walked through my days with caution, aware that the shadows were part of me now, woven into the very fabric of my being. In every shadow, there was a fragment of the truth, and though it haunted me, it also grounded me, tethering me to a reality shaped by my sacrifices. The whispering shadows had revealed the darkest parts of my soul, and in embracing them, I found the strength to carry on, forever changed, forever vigilant. Have you ever woken up to find the world doesn't sound right? It was the silence that first grabbed my attention, a dense, suffocating quiet that swallowed my town. But what lay beyond that silent facade was far more horrifying than I ever could have imagined. For years, mornings in my quiet suburb had a sort of predictable charm. The chatter of neighbors, the laughter of children, and the distant hum of traffic provided a comforting backdrop to my mundane routine. But that day was different. I awoke with a start, an uneasy feeling gnawing at my gut. As I dragged myself out of bed and stumbled towards the kitchen, the eerie stillness began to settle over me. The usual cacophony of life was conspicuously absent. No morning news playing on the TV next door, no dogs barking, no car engines revving, just silence. I shook off the unease and brewed a pot of coffee, hoping the familiar ritual would ground me. But even the gurgling of the coffee maker seemed muted, as if dampened by an invisible force. Frowning, I peered out of the window. The world looked the same, the tidy lawns, the neat rows of houses, the parked cars, yet everything felt off. Determined to shake off my growing paranoia, I ventured outside to get the newspaper. The air was thick, almost oppressive, and I couldn't shake the sense that something was watching me. As I bent to pick up the paper, a movement caught my eye. I straightened up and saw Mrs. Henderson standing in her garden, clippers in hand, staring blankly into the distance. "Good morning, Mrs. Henderson," I called out, forcing a smile. She didn't respond, didn't even blink. It was as if she was frozen in time, eyes glazed over with an unnatural vacancy. A chill ran down my spine. I hurried back inside, slamming the door behind me. "What the hell is going on?" I muttered under my breath. Trying to calm my racing thoughts, I decided to distract myself with some housework. But the silence followed me everywhere, a constant reminder that something was terribly wrong. When I could no longer bear it, I retreated to the attic, hoping the space would offer some solace. It was there that I noticed the old mirror. Covered in a thin layer of dust, it stood propped against the far wall, an unassuming relic I had never paid much attention to before. But today, its presence seemed to demand my focus. Against my better judgment, I approached it, wiping away the dust with a trembling hand. The reflection stared back, yet there was something unsettling about it. The room behind me looked the same, but felt strangely unfamiliar. Driven by a mix of dread and curiosity, I extended my hand towards the mirror's surface. Instead of the cold, hard resistance of glass, my fingers slipped through, as if passing through water. A shiver ran through me. Gathering my courage, I stepped forward, feeling a peculiar sensation of dislocation as I crossed the threshold. I found myself in the same attic, yet everything was subtly altered. The air was colder, the light dimmer. It was like stepping into a photograph that had been drained of all warmth and vitality. Heart pounding, I made my way down the stairs, every creak echoing unnervingly. My living room was identical to the one I had just left, yet an oppressive atmosphere hung over it. The silence was even more profound, pressing against my ears like a physical weight. As I stood there, trying to make sense of it all, I noticed something from the corner of my eye, a figure sitting on my couch, flipping through a photo album. It was me. My doppelganger glanced up, a chilling smile spreading across her face. "Welcome," she whispered, her voice a distorted echo of my own. "I've been waiting." My heart raced, panic surging through me. I turned and fled, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my mind a whirl of terror and confusion. As I stumbled back into the attic, I knew I had to find a way back to my own world. This was just the beginning of my nightmare. Compelled by fear and an urgent need to escape, I raced towards the mirror, hoping it would return me to the familiar safety of my home. But as I reached out, a cold, clammy hand clasped my wrist. My reflection had come alive, stepping out of the mirror with a sinister grin. "You can't leave," she hissed, tightening her grip. "This is your home now." Summoning every ounce of strength and courage, I yanked my arm free and plunged through the mirror, expecting resistance but finding none. I tumbled onto the dusty floor of my attic, heart hammering in my chest. I was back, but the silence still lingered, heavier than before. Desperate to understand what was happening, I began to research the mirror, searching for any clues that might explain this horrific phenomenon. But the answers I found only deepened my fear. It was then that I heard the soft, measured footsteps approaching. I turned, and there she was, my doppelganger, standing at the threshold of the attic, her eyes gleaming with malevolent intent. "We're not finished yet," she whispered, her voice a haunting echo in the oppressive silence. I bolted down the stairs and out of the house, frantically searching for someone, anyone who could help me. The streets were deserted, the once familiar faces now twisted and vacant. In my panic, I collided with Elaine, who was equally disoriented and terrified. "Clara, What's happening? She asked, gripping my arm. I don't know, I gasped, but we're not alone. Together, we made our way to Elaine's house, searching for answers and safety in numbers. It was then that we discovered Henry, hiding in his workshop, his eyes filled with fear and determination. We need to figure this out, he said, his voice steady despite the terror that gripped us all. As we pieced together the horrifying truth, the reality of our situation set in. This parallel universe was not just a twisted reflection. It was a trap, and the doppelgängers were intent on replacing us all. Our only hope was to find a way back to our own world, but the path was fraught with danger and deception. The fight for our survival had just begun, and the shadows of our own fears loomed large, threatening to consume us. Elaine and I moved through the unsettling quiet of the mirrored town, a chilling sense of urgency propelling us forward. Every whispered conversation between us felt like a deafening admittance of vulnerability, but we had no choice. We needed allies, and we needed answers. We found more clues and more questions haunting the mirrored streets. Despite the familiarity of our surroundings, every shadow seemed deeper, every corner more menacing. Elaine's house, normally a beacon of warmth and hospitality, now stood as an ominous fortress we approached with trepidation. "What's the plan?" Elaine asked, her voice barely above a whisper as we stood at her doorstep. "First, we need to see if there's anything in your home that can help. Then, we need to find someone who knows more about this place," I replied, my heart pounding in my chest. We slipped inside, the silence of the mirrored house pressing down on us. Elaine, navigating her own living room, looked both familiar and strange in this dim light. We searched for anything that could serve as a weapon or provide additional information. Old books, photographs, mementos, they all felt like remnants of a life that was slipping away. Unsettling sounds echoed through the empty house as the minutes ticked by, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Just as we were about to leave, we heard a shuffling noise from upstairs. "Did you hear that?" Elaine whispered, eyes wide with fear. I nodded, muscles tensed in readiness. We crept upstairs, hoping against hope that it wasn't our doubles lurking in the shadows. My mind raced with the possibilities of what we might find, each more horrifying than the last. The noise led us to the spare bedroom, the door partially ajar. With a shared glance, both nervous and determined, Elaine and I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was dark, save for a flickering candle on the desk, an odd and misplaced touch. A figure hunched over the desk, scribbling furiously in a journal. As we approached, the figure turned and I recoiled in shock. It wasn't a doppelganger. It was Henry, disheveled, his eyes wild with a mix of fear and desperation. "Henry, what are you doing here?" Elaine asked, clearly shocked. "I've been hiding," he said, his voice hoarse, "trying to figure out how to get out of this nightmare." We filled Henry in on what we'd discovered so far, and his expression grew grimmer by the minute. He revealed that he'd uncovered some disturbing truths during his own investigations. This mirrored world was designed to trap people, to replicate and replace them one by one. "We need to stick together," Henry said firmly. "It's the only way we'll survive this." We formed a pact, united by our shared horror and determination to escape. Henry's presence seemed to stabilize our fragile sense of hope. He led us to his workshop, where he had pieced together more clues and a rough map of the places he'd explored. The workshop itself was cluttered, filled with the tools of his trade, and hastily scrawled notes that seemed both desperate and determined. We pored over the map as Henry explained his theories about the parallel world. His insights were invaluable, but they came with a chilling discovery. The doppelgängers were growing bolder, hunting us in our own homes. Our planning was interrupted by a sound from the back of the workshop. I turned to see my doppelganger standing at the threshold, a smile playing on her lips. "You can't hide forever," she taunted, her voice a sickening echo of my own. "This place is ours now." Panic surged through me, my heart pounding erratically. Elaine and Henry were already moving, grabbing makeshift weapons from the workshop benches. My doppelganger stepped forward, menacing and serene, exuding a dark confidence that rattled my very core. I picked up a hammer, its weight grounding me as adrenaline fueled my resolve. We engaged in a tense and chaotic struggle, the dim light of the workshop casting elongated shadows over the confrontation. My double seemed to anticipate my every move, mirroring my actions with an eerie precision. The fight was brutal and disorienting. Elaine's double appeared, launching herself at her original with a snarl. The room filled with the sounds of scuffling feet, grunts of effort, and the dull thud of blows. Henry fought off an assault from his double, using his strength and ingenuity to fend off the immediate threat. In the chaos, I found myself backed against the workshop wall, my doppelganger's eyes burning with a malevolent hunger. Summoning every ounce of determination, I struck out with the hammer, connecting with bone and sinew. She faltered, giving me the precious seconds I needed to regroup. "Get to the attic," I yelled, my voice hoarse from exertion. "We have to smash the mirror." We fought our way through the silent house, the relentless pursuit of our doubles driving us forward. Bloodied and exhausted, we burst into the attic, where the mirror waited, shimmering with a dark invitation. "There!" Henry shouted, pointing at the mirror. "Break it!" With a final surge of strength, I swung the hammer into the glass, shattering the surface into 1,000 fragments. The room erupted with a violent cacophony as the pieces fell to the floor, the connection to the parallel worlds severed. Breathing heavily, we looked around, the oppressive silence lifting slightly. We had bought ourselves some time, but the threat of the doppelgängers still loomed. We needed to find a permanent way out, and every moment counted. As we stood amidst the shattered glass, our reflections gazing back at us from a multitude of fragments, I knew this battle was far from over. The shattered mirror lay in fragments around us, each piece reflecting shards of our terrified faces. The oppressive weight of imminent danger still hung heavy in the air. We had disrupted the doppelgänger's plan, but the fight was not over. "We need to move," Henry urged, his eyes darting towards the attic door. "They'll keep coming." Elaine nodded, her face pale but resolute. "Where do we go? How do we stop them for good?" "We need to find the source," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure what or where that source was. But every part of me screamed that we had disturbed something deeply wrong, and it was not confined to just one mirror. As we clambered down the attic stairs, the house creaked ominously. Every shadow seemed alive, every corner a potential threat. We needed to gather our wits, devise a better plan. We reached the bottom, breathless but determined. "To the basement," Henry said suddenly. "There must be something there." The basement had always given me the creeps, but I nodded, recognizing the grim logic. In a place like this, where reflections carried malevolence, its dark, hidden depths might hold the answers. We moved cautiously, our makeshift weapons at the ready. The basement door creaked open, revealing a space that was darker and colder than I remembered. We descended, the steps groaning under our weight. At the far end of the room, another large mirror loomed, untouched by the dust and decay around it. "There," I said, pointing. "That must be the source." Elaine gasped as her reflection blossomed from the dark glass. "We have to destroy it," she said, gripping a pipe wrench she had picked up along the way. As we approached, a chorus of hissing voices erupted. The mirror fogged, and on its surface we saw our doppelgängers. They smiled wickedly, their eyes gleaming with dark intent. "You can't escape us," my double whispered, stepping forward from the glass like a demon from a nightmare. "This place is ours." The air grew thick with tension. We needed to act before they could fully manifest. Summoning my courage, I lunged at the mirror, hammer raised. My doppelganger grabbed my arm, stopping my strike mid-swing. It was like grappling with my own fears made flesh, every whisper of doubt, every regret manifesting in her strength. Elaine and Henry were similarly entangled with their own doubles, struggling and grunting with effort. "Fight it!" I yelled. "It feeds on our fear." Rallying my inner strength, I focused on my reason to fight, to reclaim my life, my sanity. I twisted free and swung the hammer with a primal scream. The mirror cracked, spiderweb fissures spreading outward from the point of impact. "No!" My double's scream echoed with 100 voices, an otherworldly chorus of anger and despair. I struck again, shattering the glass into a glittering cascade. The ghosts of our doubles flickered and wavered, their forms dissolving as the mirror cracked. Elaine and Henry, emboldened, redoubled their efforts until the mirror was nothing but shards on the basement floor. As the final piece shattered, an infernal wind howled, sweeping through the room. Our doubles screamed, their voices mingling with the wind, and then everything fell silent. I dropped the hammer, my breath ragged. The air felt lighter, the oppressive weight lifting. We had done it. We had broken the connection to the mirror world. At least, that's what I hoped. Henry slumped against the wall, his face etched with exhaustion but eyes gleaming with relief. Elaine sat on the floor amongst the broken glass, tears of fear and triumph tracing lines down her cheeks. "Is it over?" she whispered. "I think so," I replied, though a nagging doubt lingered. We helped each other up and carefully navigated out of the basement. The house seemed lighter, almost welcoming, but we knew better than to trust appearances. Once back in the living room, we sank onto the couch, drained but alive. We shared a moment of silence, reflecting on the nightmare we had survived. As hours passed, the terror began to feel like a distant, terrible memory, a bad dream from which we had finally awakened. But a haunting revelation awaited us. As twilight fell and the house's shadows deepened, I caught a familiar movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned to the cracked hallway mirror, the only one we hadn't destroyed. There, standing just behind me in the reflection, was my double, her eyes glinting with malevolent amusement, a chilling reminder that the mirror world's threat might still linger. A shiver ran down my spine as I faced her, our eyes locking in a silent, sinister understanding. This fight was not over, and the reality we had fought to reclaim was still precarious, teetering on the edge of an ever-present nightmare.